Welcome to this week's episode of Talk, Taste, and Travel, where we explore the world from the comfort of our homes and taste all of the amazing wines from these wonderful regions worldwide. My name is Kristen Sandvig. I'm the founder of LIONHOUND Travel, and with me is Adele Corrigan, General Manager of 13 Celsius. Adele, say hi to everybody. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, and I'm happy to see so many familiar faces from last week and all the weeks before. I'm Adele from 13 Celsius, wine lady and manager over there. Excited about today's episode for sure. Uruguay is definitely on my bucket list of wine regions and just overall vacations. I'm very happy, and especially after chatting with Kristen, because I know you spent some time recently down there too. I'm excited to kind of like relive your travel stories too.
I am super excited. You guys who don't know me, I spent my honeymoon in Uruguay. So Uruguay, Argentina, and Brazil, those were the last countries that I visited before the pandemic really started. So I was hoping to return to Uruguay this fall again. It doesn't look like it's going to happen this year, but gives me something to look forward to next time. So with that, welcome to Uruguay. I'm sure many of you guys have heard of this country. Many of you guys may have tried some of the wines at 13 at some point, but most of you might wonder what there even is to do in Uruguay and why you would ever want to visit it. It is one of the best off the beaten path destinations, and it's home to dramatic landscapes, little known vineyards, culturally rich colonial towns, and rural ranches with beautiful beaches, and guest houses, and glamorous cities to match. Uruguay itself is the second richest country in South America, where education is free and the per capita income is high. You can feel it when you meet the locals. They're happy, welcoming, and extremely knowledgeable about their country. And one of the things that was so special about my visit there was how safe and warm and welcoming everybody felt, or everybody was when I was there. And I'm super excited to take all of you guys there this evening. While the ever popular Punta del Este is full of glitzy yacht clubs, sprawling hotels, and fine dining restaurants, the more laid back La Barra and Jose Ignacio is home to some of Uruguay's best beaches, where they truly embody the feeling of barefoot luxury. And that's where I actually spent most of my honeymoon. Since we are a wine show as well, we're exploring the regions of Carmelo, CANELONES, MONTEVIDEO, and the Maldonado region. Small scale producers are here, and there are some world famous chefs and fantastic restaurants. So with that, Adele, why don't you give us an overview into the rest of Uruguay as a wine destination? And just a reminder to our guests, please mute yourself if you unmuted yourself. There's a little bit of background noise. So Adele, take it away.
Welcome to Uruguay. This is a country the size of Washington State. And all of the wine regions, if you can see on the map, are all sort of along, most of them at least are along that border down there onto the south. Although this is a country that most people don't know even makes wine. But that could be because cows outnumber people 4-1, and cows don't usually like to drink wine. Though sometimes they get bathed in wine in certain countries, like in Japan. But historically, wine production, it arrived in Uruguay from the Spanish in the early 1600s. This is when, everyone was discovering the New World. And of course, with that, they would bring vines with them and plant them in certain areas. However, the wine industry really didn't begin until the mid 1800s with a grape called Tannat. And this grape originated from a small part of southwest France called Mataron, and we'll get a little bit more into that later, but it was brought by some Basque immigrants. The grape Tannat sometimes is even named after the Basque immigrant's last name as a synonym, so depending on where you are in Uruguay, you might hear it called both ways, Tannat and Harig. I think I might be saying that wrong. But it is the dominant red varietal. So you know how we have like Cabernet Sauvignon is like the king of Napa Valley. Tannat is going to be the main grape claim to fame for all of Uruguay. Although grapes have been growing here for 250 years, commercial viniculture really didn't begin until the second half of the 19th century, which was 200 years after Chile and Argentina. So Uruguay is a little bit behind the times for commercial production. But how Uruguay differs from Chile and Argentina is that almost all of the wineries are family owned. They're small scale, and most all of them have a European winemaking tradition in some way. A lot of Uruguay is filled with a lot of Spanish and Italian immigrants as well, along with a lot of expats. But the production, if you were to compare it to another winery, we're going to use Concho y Toro from Chile as a comparison. You can find Concho y Toro in any sort of gas station, grocery store, convenience store all over the United States and just everywhere. Concho y Toro, that one winery produces more wine than all of your Uruguay. So Uruguay doesn't really produce a whole lot of wine. And most of it actually gets sent over to Brazil. They export over half of their production to Brazil, which is pretty crazy. But if you are going to go and visit, there's lots of really cool opportunities to visit with some of these small family-owned bodegas. A lot of the grapes that you're going to find here, other than Tannat, which we'll talk about later, they have mostly Bordeaux-style varieties: Cabernet, Merlot, Cabernet Franc. You'll even find Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc. And also, interestingly, a little bit of Viognier, which is a more aromatic white wine as well. So of some of the main regions here, most of the vineyards that we're going to see are in the south part of the country, which are all highlighted in the green parts right there. Canelones, Montevideo, and San Jose are some of the different departments. All of this area is really within like a 3 or 4 hour drive stretch along the south. So you can really hit most of these pretty easily. And it's still beautiful because you're right there on the coast, and you get some of those like Atlantic influences with the climate. Uruguay is actually the only country in Latin America that is completely outside of the tropics. They really, truly have a continental Atlantic climate with the Atlantic breeze is blowing through. And this really helps with some of those wine growing regions that need proper seasons in order to develop and fully ripen evenly a lot of the grapes. Most famous region is definitely the Canelones region, and we'll get into an example of some Tannat from there as our next wine in the series. But most of the wine adventures start right in the capital, right, Kristen?
That's right. And Montevideo is where your trip will start if you're flying from the United States. This is the capital city, and there are actually more things to do in Montevideo than you might imagine. The city is often overlooked for its more famous neighbors like Buenos Aires and Sao Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, these major cities that kind of surround these major cities in the surrounding countries. But it's an interesting place to spend a few days exploring its main tourist attractions and taking in the relaxed atmosphere. The country's 18th century capital is home to atmospheric cafes, galleries, museums, and antique shops, and it's buzzing with vibrant night spots, hip restaurants and bars, and urban beaches. The Solis Theater and the Palacio Salvo, the Montevideo Cathedral, and the Gateway to the Citadel are just a few of the must-see highlights when planning a visit to Montevideo. And one thing that is super cool about Montevideo is that it is very drivable, and that's something to kind of note about Uruguay as a whole. I rented a car when I was there, and it was super easy to get from place to place, and it's such a safe and warm country that you really can kind of move about freely and in a really comfortable way. And as you can see from this photo, Montevideo is a very colorful city. It almost has some of those like French New Orleans style vibes. And when checking into a hotel in Montevideo, my pick is the Sofitel, which has a delightful French flair. And it is just steps from the beach in the upscale Carrasco neighborhood. This iconic hotel retains its early 20th century glamour. It only has 116 spacious rooms and suites, and it offers refined comfort with high-tech amenities. You can savor high tea and beach views at the tea gallery or sip a cocktail at Thay's Lounge Bar. You can dine in the famous 1921 restaurant before trying your hands at the elegantly modern casino. And this is a really great place to begin your trip if you're traveling internationally. Coming from Houston, you can connect through Miami, you can connect through Panama, and you can connect through other major cities in South America, such as Chile or Buenos Aires. Last week, we visited Buenos Aires and we visited the regions in Argentina. And another way to enter Uruguay is through Colonia del Sacramento. So Argentina is separated, or the Rio de Plata separates the sprawling city of Buenos Aires from Colonia del Sacramento in Uruguay. There are only 28 nautical miles between these two destinations, and they feel entirely different, but you actually can take a ferry from Buenos Aires to Uruguay. And this is a way where if you want to combine the destinations, from Houston, we typically do have that direct flight from Houston to Buenos Aires. So it can be an easier way to go about the trip when you add the ferry into the mix. And this town is super quaint, and it's a UNESCO listed World Heritage Site. One of the best ways to get acquainted with this enchanting town is to simply take a walk of the cobbled streets, the old buildings, and take in the historical sites to fully immerse yourself in it all. It is an 18th century Puerto de Campo, and the lighthouse and basilica are two must-visit places. The many museums provide travelers with countless opportunities to immerse themselves in modern-day artistic creations or to venture into the past. Little Colonia is a Portuguese settlement from 1680, and all the buildings in the historical neighborhood are low-rise and colorful, while the streets are narrow and cobbled. There are numerous crumbling ruins and small parks to enjoy that will make travelers feel as though they've stepped into a postcard. So as we're moving from Montevideo, we're heading along that southern coast towards the west of the country. And when you're staying in Colonia del Sacramento, my pick is the CHARCO Hotel. This is a little bit more rustic than some of the other properties we typically visit in Talk, Taste, and Travel, but this charming boutique hotel has 8 rooms in the heart of Uruguay's Colonia del Sacramento. It's made up of lovingly converted original 1680 Portuguese houses, which form the rooms, suites, and restaurant with views overlooking the river in Colonia del Sacramento. Just a 10-minute stroll from the port when you arrive on the ferry. It's in an ideal position for exploring this charming and historic town. It compromises of several of these houses with stone walls and terracotta tiled roofs, and the integrity has been carefully maintained, and the interiors are tastefully restored, and it really has a family home kind of feel to it, as well as a charming bistro restaurant. And with that, let's get into the wines of this region. So Adele, why don't you give us an overview of what we're drinking today before we continue exploring, so we can all open that first bottle and settle in as we continue our trip around this wonderful country.
So the 3 wines for today, the first one that we're going to drink is the Sauvignon Blanc. The second wine, and this needs a little bit of explanation because we had a supply issue halfway through selling and advertising for these cases. So half of you guys have the Bodegas Bauza Tannat, and the other half of you guys have the Montes Toscani Tannat. Both of the wineries are very close to each other. They're from the same area, made in a similar way. We will talk about both of those wineries when we get to it for the second wine. So just so that no one is confused or anything like that. And both wines were virtually the exact same price. So I try to find something as comparable as to each other as possible. And then we're going to finish with Bodegas Garzon Petit Verdot. So if you're going to open up one of the reds and save the other ones, I think maybe opening up the Petit Verdot now to get a little bit of air might be a good idea. Or open all 3 of them and let's party. But if you're going to choose one over the other, the Petit Verdot would need a little bit more time, I think, to air out.
For sure. And yeah, it's your life. You can do whatever you want. Drink all 3 bottles. But I think to your point, Adele, you and I had talked a little bit about the issue with the Tannat. And for us, we decided it was more important to talk about Tannat as a grape than have one of these particular, than to highlight the vineyard.
Exactly.
Because Tannat is such an important grape in Uruguay, and it is, and I believe Uruguay is the only country that has officially declared Tannat as their national grape. So we'll get into that a little bit more. But Adele, let's go to the Pizzorno and open this Sauvignon Blanc and tell us a little bit about it.
Nice. So Pizzorno Don Prospero is a winery that's about 30-minute drive, like directly north of Montevideo. This is another example of like a small bodega that's been owned by multi-generations. They're on their 4th generation now of wine, and over 80 years of history of being winemakers and growing grapes and producing pretty cool wine. They have a pretty nice family legacy of, you know, loving and respecting the vines and letting nature kind of do its thing, but they're not natural or biodynamic or anything like that. They've recently added some more modern techniques in grape growing and winemaking, just sort of in search of making more clean and really well-made wines that have like that persistent finish and are very interesting. These wines, they also do other things in their range. They've got Tannats, they've got Cab and stuff like that. But their Sauvignon Blanc, I thought, was a really interesting expression. So this region in particular sees a similar climate to that of Bordeaux, France, and you see a bit of Sauvignon Blanc planted as one of the main white grapes of Bordeaux. So it makes a little bit of sense to me when you look at like the climate and just kind of like the aspect of all the vineyards that Sauvignon Blanc would do pretty well here. If you were to go and visit this winery, I thought that this was something that's really cool. They offer a variety of different packages that you can have a wine experience. And one of which was a helicopter ride and a premium tasting. So I guess they have like a helicopter on site that they'll just take you for 30 minutes as a flight over Montevideo and over like the other wineries in that region. And it's only like $300. I was like, sign me up. I'll do that. That sounds great.
I think something that is super cool about if you are somebody who likes helicopter experiences but has been turned away by the price tag in like Hawaii or something like that, this is the place to do it. There's really beautiful views of Uruguay, of Argentina, Brazil, Chile, and pricing for helicopters is a lot more competitive in South America. So you can have that really special luxurious experience for a much better value than you would in Hawaii.
Nice. So this Sauvignon Blanc in particular is all aged in stainless steel, just like most Sauvignon Blancs are. This one has an average vineyard age of about 18 years, so they're still fairly young vines, but not super young in particular. This wine in particular, I think, has lots of tropical notes to it, really kind of showing that this is from a place that gets a little bit of extra sunlight to really ripen those grapes. There's lots of very classic grapefruit, but there's also sort of like an underlying tart passion fruit that's really, really nice to this wine. And it has a really nice finish as well. I think that this wine is a really good food wine as well, or it could be just drank on a patio by itself.
For sure. And as far as food goes, tell us a little bit about what you would pair with it. I had my own suggestions, but I want to hear from you as well.
Well, Sauvignon Blanc and goat cheese always go really well together, like soft goat cheese. So if you wanted to do like a goat cheese frittata as like an option, or even like goat cheese stuffed squash blossoms. But as your suggestion, linguine with clams, always very, very nice. Any sort of like shellfish and pasta with like a light sauce is great too.
Yeah, shellfish is one of my favorite pairings with Sauvignon Blanc, whether you have something a little bit more hearty, like a pasta, or just anything kind of light with a little bit of tomato sauce, or even just some lemon and salt. Lighter fishes and shellfish are just my favorite thing to have with it. Sauvignon Blanc is one of my go-to whites, and so I love just kind of, and you know, being in Texas and in Houston, it's summer most of the year. So having these really nice whites that pair with different types of dishes is always really a good find, I think.
Yeah.
Well, with that, let's continue our trip into Western Uruguay and visit another little region called Carmelo. The Carmelo Resort and Spa is nestled along the banks of the Rio de la Plata amid aromatic eucalyptus and pine, and it's near both Buenos Aires and Montevideo. Yet this 100-acre resort surrounded by working farms and boutique wineries feels a million miles away. There is a 13,000 square foot spa that's consistently rated among the best in South America. And with only 44 bungalows and bi-level suites, you really feel like you're tucked away in this luxuriously cozy refuge. They've got a beautiful pool with double cascades, great kids amenities, golf, polo lessons, horseback rides with local gauchos, everything. And today we are super fortunate to have Mariana Planes from Carmelo Resort and Spa with us to tell us about some of her favorite things to do in the area and the things that she thinks really shine in Carmelo and at the Carmelo Resort and Spa. So Mariana, I'd like to invite you to unmute yourself and introduce yourself to our guests. Mariana?
Thank you so much. Thank you, Kristen. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. It's a pleasure to have you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. My pleasure. Well, here it's hot today in Uruguay, in Carmelo. I live in Carmelo. And the resort, it's really incredible. It's a 44 hectares resort, everything surrounded by pines and eucalyptus trees. We have vineyards in the resort itself, and we have also a winery that is only 5 minutes from the resort that is called Narbona. So one of my recommendations, I would say that if you visit Carmelo, apart from staying in the hotel, I would definitely recommend you to do a picnic in the vineyards of Narbona, of this winery, and then to have a wine tasting and dinner with the enologist of the winery. She's great. And you can learn lots of different, well, of course, our typical grape is Tanat, but we also have Sauvignon Blanc, we also have Merlot, we also have Cabernet, we have different grapes, but the Tanat is the typical one. And then apart from the resorts, that we have lots of activities in the resort itself for adults, for families, for couples. We do have a port that is called Puerto Camacho, that it's only 5 minutes from the hotel. And there we organize, for example, water activities like sunset cruises, we do kayaking, we do horseback riding. And in that place, we also have a restaurant that is called Basta Pedro, that is where we offer pizzas in the wooden oven, that they are great. And we have also a beer house for artisan beer that we make here also in Carmelo. So the guests have the opportunity to do like beer house and then a sunset cruise and then do the visit to the winery. So in a small place, because we are in a city that lives 20,000 inhabitants, you can do lots of things without like moving from the resort and 10 minutes around.
That's been one of my favorite things about visiting Uruguay just in general was there's so much to do, but you never feel rushed. It's not a place where you go and it's like, oh, I have to see this site, I have to check this off my list, I have to do this and this and this, otherwise I didn't really go. And you can really stay still here and you can kind of decide what you feel like doing and what sounds like fun. And last week we actually talked quite a bit about Relais and Chateau when we visited Argentina. And so I do want to let everybody know that Narbona is a Relais and Chateau hotel and restaurant as well. And we're not staying at the hotel because we're staying at Carmelo, but we are going to go check out these the different dining options here. do you have a favorite dish that you would recommend at Narbona that stands out and really kind of exemplifies what Uruguayan food is?
Well, really, I can't say one, but for example, the risotto is very, very good because they make it with the artisan cheese, because we produce cheese in Narbona. Apart from producing wine, we produce cheese, yogurts, and then there's we also produce homemade pasta. So the pasta there is very good, very, very good. Apart from the barbecues, of course, because sometimes we do outside barbecues, because as you know, as in Argentina, in Uruguay, we have great steak. I'm Argentinian, but I've been living in Uruguay for like more than 10 years. But I can say both are very, very good.
I love it. And I love that Argentinian influence and the Italian influence, and how there is kind of that European influence in the culinary scene there, but at the same time, it still is very much its own thing. And one thing that really impressed me about Uruguay, something that I didn't even know I was going to love, was how amazing the food was everywhere. Some of the best meals I've had in my entire life were in Uruguay, and I just was blown away. It just wasn't something that I was expecting. But when I was kind of reading a little bit about the country way back when, one thing that I thought was really interesting about the meat is hormones were banned back in the 60s. So the meat in Uruguay is super, super high quality. Everything's free range. And they actually started tracking cattle back in, I think, 2013. So they can verify the quality control across the entire country. And Uruguayan meat has become some of the most sought after meat in the world, just because of how clean the approach is. And I think you can taste that in the produce. You can taste that in the various ingredients that they use in the food there, because it just feels so so clean and delicious, and it has that really beautiful sense of place. So tell us a little bit more about what some of the, I know doing different cooking classes and things like that are also available at a lot of these places. Do you have a culinary experience that's a little bit more interactive that you'd recommend?
Yes, we do. For example, during the harvest, what we do is like the harvest party. That would be that it's more or less in February, March, and we do all food stations, lift stations in Narbona and the resort. And for example, people participate in the harvest process. Yes, they pick up the grapes, and they put their feet on, and they get their shirts. And then after that, we have all that experience outdoor, everything outdoor with music and everything. And the chef cooks outside, and they make like a kind of show that it's very, very, very interesting and funny.
That's one thing that I think is super cool about Uruguay in general as well. You guys take your festivals and your events very seriously down there, and everything is a party. And one thing that's kind of cool, just with the differences in the seasons between North America and South America, Uruguay is super concentrated with tourists from Argentina and Brazil in December, January, February. But I went at the end of November around Thanksgiving time, and that was absolutely perfect. And I know it's becoming more of a spring break destination for American travelers as well in March. And one of the benefits to that, traveling in November and March, is you miss the peak season for South American travelers, but you still get that warm weather. You get to experience things like participating in harvest and doing things like that, and just having a little bit more of a laid back vibe than you would at peak season. And I loved being able to visit that time of year. Is there anything else that you think our viewers should know about the resort or the area before we continue into our next wine today?
Well, the resort, it's incredible. It has only 44 rooms. It's like inside a forest. And we also offer, for example, something that is lovely, that is yoga and meditation lessons by the river in the resort that are complimentary to all our guests. We have bikes to wander all around the area. And then one activity that I love is the sunset cruise that we do at sunset hours with some cold cuts, beers, and non-alcoholic beverages. And the sunset that you get here in Uruguay, Kristen, you definitely get it. It's really incredible.
Gorgeous.
I wish I could send you some photos, but it's incredible. So November, it's a great time. It's a great time because climate is perfect. Today it's a little bit hotter, but you are like around the 25 centigrade. I don't know how we look.
Like the high 70s for Fahrenheit.
So it's great because you can do lots of activities.
Yeah, it was the perfect time to visit for us, and we absolutely loved it. I wish that I had been able to visit Carmelo when I was there. We were planning on visiting this year, but we'll have to table it for now. I can't wait to come see the property in person, though. And Mariana, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
You can stay on. I would love to open up the floor for questions a little bit later. Is that okay? Can you do questions a little later? Okay, well, hope so. But let's move on and continue to our next wine. So Adele, we kind of mentioned already that we have two wines today as examples of Tannat. Tell us about both of them, and let's get into Tannat and why it's important, where it's from, and what is special about it.
Yeah, let's do a deep dive into Tannat. It's definitely a grape that no one's really heard of before and probably has not consumed very, very often. I have only really come across like 3 or 4 around town, and I've carried them on and off the list for By the Glass, but again, it's not something that people are like banging down the doors, got to try. But I think that that's something that we're going to change today. I think people are going to be really excited about these wines. So again, if you had Bodegas Bauza or if you have the Montes Toscanini, both wineries about 20-minute drive from each other. They're both located in Canelones, and the Montes Toscanini family is owned and operated by several generations dating well back over 100 years. You find a similar story with Bodegas Bauza. They also have, between, 30 and 50 hectares of vineyards. So they're a fairly small to medium-sized winery. And both wines are 100% Tannat, and both wines have spent 15 or, in the case of Bodegas Bauza, 16 months in oak as well. So both of these wines should taste fairly similar to each other, and I think are really good examples of this grape grown from this region in Uruguay. So let's take a deep dive. Let's talk about Tannat for a little bit while you're tasting this wine. So as we mentioned at the beginning of this episode, Tannat's not native to Uruguay. It's actually native to Southwest France. And it's kind of interesting because, a lot of Spanish and Italian influence from all over, Uruguay happens, but we're using a lot of French grapes. So I'm not sure how French grapes kind of got their way over, other than the fact that the climate is very similar to that of Bordeaux. But why Tannat of all grapes? I don't know, but it works really well there. And there's actually more Tannat grown in Uruguay than there is in its ancestral birthplace back home in the southwest part of France. And it's a tiny little town called Mataron. Something else cool about Tannat, it's actually the healthiest of all red wines. Tannat has the most antioxidant and resveratrol levels, which help to lower blood pressure and cholesterol. So along with being really, really good for you, it's also a delicious red wine. So drinking more of this might actually help you to lower your blood pressure. It might be one of the healthiest red wines that we know of. Another really healthy red grape is Sagrantino from Umbria in Italy. But those two, Tannat and Sagrantino, are the two grapes that have the highest level of those polyphenol antioxidants. Another cool thing about Tannat, winemakers love it. They love to work with it. Tannat has a thick skin, but it's also really easy to grow in a variety of different climate conditions, especially those that have more of like a drier condition. But having a thick skin makes the grape itself less susceptible to pests or fungus or molds. And also it's more resilient when you have a fluctuation in temperature from cold to hot, and even frost. So winemakers love to work with it, and that's always fun. Something else cool about Tannat, it really only made its first appearance into like the modern world and Wine Spectator and stuff like that in 2017. So it's kind of like an untouched gem, and I'm always about one who likes things that are off the beaten path or a little bit rare or unique. So Tannat's like fairly new, and if you guys are looking at, if one of you guys have one of the bottles there, I think that one of them had like a sticker on it that was like best winery ever or something like that.
That's Garzon.
That's what it was. Yeah.
And they've won a lot of awards. But one thing I want to jump in and add is something that's characteristic of the wines that we choose to feature in Talk, Taste, and Travel is they tend to be natural wines, organic wines, sustainably made wines, even if that's not what, you know, they're advertising or using as a marketing standpoint. And Uruguay is incredibly committed to sustainability just as a country. And so all of the wines are organic. There aren't pesticides, there aren't any additives or anything like that. And so while these they're not necessarily not necessarily all biodynamic, but they have this really authentic sense of place and sense of terroir. And since using hormones and pesticides and things like that was banned so long ago, before the wines that we're drinking today even really like set themselves in the soil, this is just, I think, a really cool example of a part of the world that's been untouched by a lot of the things that can kind of have negative effects on wines.
Right. It's like, why even put like certified organic on there when they've been doing that for so long? It's like, why would we do it any other way? You know, and just getting rid of all those other like manipulated influences and harmful effects and stuff like that, for sure. Another cool thing that I like about Tannat is that they're always fairly inexpensive. A good Tannat, like a really good one, should retail between like 20 and 30 bucks, which means that like in a restaurant, depending on their markup, I mean, a good Tannat bottle might be $50 to $60 and would be absolutely delicious. So let's get into, what does this wine taste like? What does Tannat taste like? What are we getting from this, and what do typical Tannats tend to be? Well, they tend to range in color from dark red. You can hardly see through the glass when you have like a full glass, and the nose on it is always definitely, to me, like black licorice, dark chocolate, espresso, a little smokiness to it, and then it always finishes with just like a little bit of spice, and that comes from that heavy oak aging. So if you were to compare like French Tannat versus Uruguayan Tannat, the French style is more red fruited, and then the Uruguayan style is more tannic and more black fruited. So if you were looking for an example from France and comparing it to one from Uruguay, they would taste very, very different from each other. But
kind of like Malbec from Cahors and Malbec from Argentina, right?
Exactly. But how to find a super sexy Tannat? There's a couple things that you should definitely look for, whether the winemaker tells you like on the back of the label, or you just happen to look it up online, or your local som helps you. But there's three main key things about Tannat that will make it super delicious, and the first of which is oak barrel aging. When you have a grape that is really high in tannin, like this one, oak barrel aging slowly lets a little bit of oxygen into the wine while it's aging, because, you know, an oak barrel is a semi-porous vessel. And that oxygen helps to sort of mitigate the effects of like the super astringent tannin and make it just a little bit smoother. Another thing that some winemakers can do, and this is kind of like a new age thing, they can do like micro oxygenation. And it's like a process where they just will introduce like teeny tiny amounts of oxygen during the winemaking process, which also has that kind of same effect of the oak barrel, where it softens the overbearing tannic structure that happens. And then a third thing is extended aging. You know, as a wine ages in a bottle, the cork is semi-porous. It does allow for a little bit of oxygen to come in, which will also help to smooth some of those tannins, and that over time, tannin will become, or Tannat will become really, really sexy. So, but let's try this Tannat. What do you guys think? For those who had the Bodega Sposa or the Montes Toscanini, do you guys like these? Feel free to unmute yourself if you guys want to share any tasting notes or any aha moments. Do you like it? Would you buy more of it?
Mary says she loves it, and Danielle and Daryl are drinking the Toscanini. It's their favorite, or their first Tannat. Personally, Tannat is my favorite. Tannat from Uruguay is my favorite South American style of wine. Lori says she would buy this. It's very earthy, which she likes. And I think that's something that's kind of cool about Tannat from Uruguay. That is why I like it. It does have a little bit more of like that earthy and meatiness to it than you typically expect from New World wines. There still is a little bit of a richness there. It just translates more into like rich, like sweet and savory, like steak at the same time. And I think it is a really cool wine because old world wine drinkers can find things to like about it. And Texans in particular, this is a barbecue wine. It's a steak wine. It goes with those like really big meat dishes. But one of the things that I thought was cool that you recommended was cassoulet. So tell us how you kind of came to that and why you think this is a cool pairing for it.
Yeah, and I think, you know, this wine screams food. Like it wants something that's hearty and soul warming and maybe has a little bit of like a braise or a smoke flavor to it. And so, you know, cassoulet is something like a cool dish that maybe a lot of people don't make on the regular, but you know, this picture has like a great example where you have a bunch of different meats and just that you get that hearty duo of like something that's high in protein and high in fat. And when you have tannin, the tannin in the wine helps to kind of cut through that fat of whatever you're eating. And they just will really complement each other, especially when you have like that earthy quality to this wine as well. And you pair it with things that have more savory flavors, will really complement each other.
Yeah, and I think this is one of those wines where if you're out with friends and half of you like those old world Bordeaux's or those Sagrantinos or rich like super Tuscans, and then your friends like those bold Napa Valley Cabs, this is one of those wines where you both are going to leave happy. It has things that are going to go well with lots of those heavier meat dishes and complex types of dishes that really satisfy everyone a little bit.
Yeah. And like, of course you can always take the other route and just grill a steak. For sure. Well, that's super cool. I love Tannat, and I love Uruguay, and I'm just so happy with everything about this right now. But let's loop back around and continue our journey towards our final winery today and towards the town of Jose Ignacio. If the person in this photo looks familiar, it's because it's me. And further up the coast, as we're driving along past Montevideo, Route 10 is the route to take from Montevideo to Jose Ignacio. It goes along the coast, and think of it as like the Pacific Coast Highway, where you have beautiful ocean views on one side. On your way there, you'll pass the resort town of Punta del Este, and ever popular, if perhaps on arrival or at the end of your trip, you'll
you might stop there and experience some of the glitzy yacht clubs, sprawling hotels, and fine dining restaurants. But as you continue driving, you will get to Jose Ignacio, which is a little bit more laid back. It is a small fisherman's village that's an hour drive from Punta del Este. And it used to just be a normal fishing town, but it has been completely transformed into this international destination. It is often referred to as the Hamptons of South America. And the town itself is tiny and can be easily navigated from end to end on a bicycle in under 20 minutes. But despite its size, it packs quite a culinary punch. And the homes are modern masterpieces. The town has become the summer vacation spot for well-heeled Brazilians, Argentinians, and Uruguayans. And the best time to visit is from December to February if you're a Brazilian, Argentinian, or Uruguayan. For us, like I said, I'm a huge proponent of visiting in November or March. You still have the spring, summer weather, and it's absolutely beautiful, and it's not as crowded. So perfect for a Thanksgiving getaway or for a spring break getaway. And it is hard to fully capture the essence of Uruguay's chilled beach town in words alone, because it just does have this inimitable feeling. Its wide-stretching beaches, sandy candlelit restaurants, whitewashed cottages, and linen-becked crowd are a siren call for well-to-do travelers all over the world. While summertime reaps the warmest weather, the colder months are a little special too. And it's a destination where you're never short on things to do, but there's never this sense of urgency to see the sights. You can check in, head down to the beach, and relax with an aperitif as you enjoy the sunset before hitting any of the world-class restaurants in this little beach town. And the restaurants really are unlike any place else in the world. And when you think about having the elite of Argentina and Brazil coming down, and the New York and LA crowd coming down, and people who are used to having some of the best restaurants in the world, in order to survive in Jose Ignacio as a restaurant, you have to be able to cater to that super discerning clientele. And that's something that I think Jose Ignacio does incredibly well. Mariana and I talked a little bit about the sunsets, and they are next level here in Jose Ignacio. The beaches are not the white sand beaches that we have in the Caribbean. There's some rocks, there's more of that golden brown sand, but the waves are amazing for surfing, and it's so nice to just stroll along the beach and get lost in the dunes, to do some people watching in between hitting up the restaurants and exploring the coast. So my picks to stay in Jose Ignacio are any of the Vic properties. So Vic Retreats, we'll talk a little bit more about them next week when we visit Chile as well, but they have 3 properties here in Uruguay: Estancia Vic, Playa Vic, and Bahia Vic. And all of them are in the Jose Ignacio area. Estancia Vic is where I stayed for my honeymoon. And it is about 10 minutes from the beach, and you're on this 12-room estancia on this massive estate. And everything is included in terms of activities. And you can grab your gaucho garb and head to this property that has 4,000 acres. It's romantic, it's rustic, it pays homage to Uruguay's nature. Beyond its adobe white walls lies bold architectural design and funky artwork by acclaimed contemporary artists. The living room's white sculpture and Google Earth-inspired ceiling are absolutely surreal. You can spend your days playing polo or by the pool. You'll love the colorfully chaotic tin-walled parrilla, a barbecue room with an open pit, and the myriad of activities including biking, canoeing in the lake, full moon horseback riding, tennis, and surfing are unreal. One of my favorite things about staying there was we woke up, decided we wanted to go horseback riding, and off we go. We would go down to the front desk and just pick up a couple of bikes, take them off down to the river, and then in the afternoon we would sit by the pool playing gin rummy while sipping wine together. And it truly was just this romantic experience. Then Playa Vic and Bahia Vic are actually on the coast in Jose Ignacio and more into the town center. Driving there from Estancia Vic, though, it's about 10 minutes, and the road is lined with eucalyptus trees. So in the spring, we rolled down the windows and just took in the fresh, warm breeze and this invigorating smell from all of the eucalyptus everywhere. Playa Vic is a little bit more modern, and it's a little bit more geared towards adults. That's a picture of me sitting on the edge of the pool that juts out over the ocean and over the beach, and it's a beautiful place to watch the sunset. Then Bahia Vic is right next to Playa Vic, and it's set in the dunes. And so this is more like individual bungalows where you can open up your porch and you just have the beach and the ocean in front of you. They have a really awesome pool, and La Susana is the restaurant with in Bahia Vic that is one of the top restaurants in the town. One of my favorite activities that I got to do while at Estancia was learning to play polo. And Bauti, the couple that manages the property, Bauti and Sophie, are this super cute couple, and Bauti lent me his horse, who you can see him playing on in the picture in this previous on this previous screen, and taught me how to play polo after one of his matches. I was awful, but it was a super special experience. We were able to walk into the stables and just go for a ride whenever we pleased. And people from Playa Vic and from Bahia Vic would come to watch the polo matches and to do the activities on property at Estancia, because there was just so much to do. We also had races, which was really fun. I beat my husband, which I can still have those bragging rights. And it was just a really special experience. And now let's talk about the food in a little bit more detail. La Juana was one of the first restaurants we went to, and we were absolutely blown away by our experience there. I think it was hands down one of the best meals that I've ever had in my life. It's a local favorite and a hidden gem in a residential neighborhood. It's open year-round, only for dinner. And the owners are Matthias and Lucia. Matthias is the sommelier and Lucia is the chef, and the menu changes constantly, keeping the dishes new and fresh. They bake their own bread in the restaurant every morning, and they make these fantastic pizzas and have this amazing ceviche that you can share. I don't typically eat meat, and so having really fresh fish in a destination known for its meat was a must for me, and La Juana did not disappoint. Then another restaurant is Parador La Huella, which is one of the most famous restaurants in Uruguay. What I think it's Bon Appetit magazine said the best beachside restaurant on the planet isn't in Saint-Tropez or on the Amalfi Coast. It's in Uruguay, it's in Jose Ignacio, and it's La Huella. You can smell the fire roasted meat long before you hear the Tropicalia music or spot the chimneys jutting from the thatched roof. And when the restaurant finally does emerge from the sand dunes of Playa Brava and Jose Ignacio, it looks like a bohemian pirate ship. Run aground, a warren of dining rooms, decks, and open kitchens made of wood and canvas. Inside, a hulking iron grill casts a glow onto sun-kissed South American and European families who toast to the full moon and their good fortune. And servers glide among them in Chuck Taylors, whisking wooden platters of grilled steaks, seared shrimp, and roasted vegetables. Everything is smooth, everything is right, and everyone is happy. This restaurant is such a bohemian, beachy restaurant, and the food was absolutely amazing. And the wine list is next level, and it's really nicely priced as well. If you want to go and just have a crazy meal and not pay the prices that you would pay for a similar meal in the United States, this is a fraction of what it would cost, and you can really go all out here. Then lastly, Estancia Vic. This is the funky grill room, and as Bauti put it, this is where the meat attack happens. The meat here is grilled on an open flame. You can watch it all getting made, and you sit at this little bench in the back and wait to eat all of the different things there. I typically don't eat meat, but I feel like when I travel, I love to immerse myself in culinary traditions. And I actually did participate in the meat attack. And it was fantastic. And people make reservations to come to this dining experience from all over Jose Ignacio. It's only Thursday, Friday, and Saturday and Sunday. So you can't visit it every day. And reservations are definitely a must. A couple of day trips before we get into our last wine that are really special. And for a real change of pace, you can visit Balizas or Cabo Polonio. Head to a working ranch or witness the natural wonders of Esteros de Farapos National Park. And then Cabo Polonio Nature Reserve. National Geographic named it one of the destinations, one of the 224 destinations of a lifetime. This town is completely sustainable. There's no Wi-Fi, there's no electricity. Everything is made in the town, and it has a very authentic, removed feel from the rest of the world. This is a fantastic place for stargazing as well. And there are sea lion colonies in the area you can visit to see some of the Atlantic wildlife. It really is a special place. It's not necessarily a place where you want to stay, but it's definitely worth the day trip from Jose Ignacio. So while we're in the area, the last thing we have to do while we're in this super special town is visit one of the most famous wineries in the country and one of the most famous restaurants. So Adele, take us to Garzon and tell us a little bit about it and why it was the best New World winery of 2018.
Yeah, this is super cool. And you got to visit here or stay here, right?
I did. So my husband and I spent Thanksgiving here last year. It was the first day of our honeymoon, and this is where we ate. And the restaurant here is Francis Milman, who was on Chef's Table in 2015. He's like this super, super famous chef, and I'll talk about him a little bit more once we kind of get into things. But this is an incredibly special vineyard, an incredibly special winery.
Yeah. So to get here, when I looked it up on the map, it just looks like if you were starting in Montevideo and then you were just going to be, you know, kind of traveling north up the coast for like 3 hours, you come to like the small little town of Garzon, where the area is also named after, if I'm correct. And this is kind of an interesting terroir that's different than any other part of Uruguay for growing grapes. And we start with the soil, and the soil is actually an area that is known as the crystalline basement. And this is one of the oldest soils on the planet. It dates to over 2,500 million, or sorry, 2,500 million years ago. So a really, really long time. And now all of those rocks have sort of been like broken down and kind of like altered and weathered through like millions of years of geology. But it has made like a really interesting and fantastic soil called, we call it now ballast, and growing grapes on this soil gives it a very special and specific sense of terroir that can really only be found in this part of the world. On top of that, the Atlantic influence is a little bit more. It's a big key element here at this winery because they're only about 18 kilometers away from the Atlantic Ocean versus the other few wineries. We were further up, almost into like the center of Uruguay. And so the fresh breezes that blow off the Atlantic really help to sort of like caress the vines, help to like nourish them, and also, you know, help with some of combating some of the heat and those temperatures during the summer times. But this is a state-of-the-art destination, definitely, if you're gonna go to Uruguay and you're on the wine trail. Like, this should be probably like #1 stop. And although they make Great Tannat, which was the very first Wine Spectator wine ever from Uruguay, ever was their Tannat from this place. But I figured that we were going to show Tannat earlier, so I was just kind of looking for what else does Uruguay do that's really cool. And they make this Petit Verdot, and I thought let's show this wine because a lot of people don't even know what Petit Verdot is, or if they have heard of it, it's in a blend. So Petit Verdot is one of Bordeaux's 5 main grapes. You've got Cab, Cab Franc, Merlot, Malbec, and then Petit Verdot. And usually it's like 5% of the blend or less. So to see 100% Petit Verdot is really, really interesting. And it does make sense because you have that Atlantic influence, and they very much so compare like the climate in Uruguay to that of Bordeaux. So it's cool to see this as a single vineyard, single varietal label. So the grape itself, Petit Verdot, is also a typically tannic, more structured wine. But what's interesting about this is probably one of the most floral varietals that's red that we really know. So we talked about like terpenes and like that terpenic quality when we talked about Albarino from Galicia, Spain. So this also has that like super floral quality to it, but the flowers in this, I think they're lilacs. They're African violets. They're more of like that, like purple colored flowers.
Yeah.
In addition to being like a full-bodied red wine. This is definitely black fruited. You get those like black currants, cassis, maybe a little bit of like black cherry and blackberries. I think that this wine is interesting. It's also a little herbal. I'm drinking this one right now out of my glass, and like I was definitely getting some sort of like a sage as well, and like some dried herbs along with those like lilac, lavender, purple flowers.
Let me jump in real quick. And it's so funny that you mentioned that in particular because so Garzón, Bodegas Garzón is about 20 minutes from Estancia Vic. So Jose Ignacio is where you want to stay if you're visiting this winery. So you have those eucalyptus, you've got this dust that's kind of coming up and around. All of the flowers surrounding the property are those purple flowers as well. And you have like a salvia and lavender. And I took photos because the flowers there that they had at Garzón looked a lot like our wedding flowers, which were lavender, sage, and those purple flowers and those herbs. And so it's super funny that you just mentioned that because I'm like, just smelling this wine brings me back to being there and to drinking this exact Petit Verdot while we were at the vineyard, and just the whole like sense of place. It's just like a sensory experience. And I get to relive it today just by, smelling this right here and tasting this again.
And I love it like when wines are able to convey the environment that they're in, and it is part of the terroir, is like the flora and fauna that exists around the different vineyards, and sometimes that has an effect on the wines. Like we talked about this when we were in Australia and talking about how like a lot of wild eucalyptus in Hunter Valley sometimes gives like a minty eucalyptus thing to the wines. And it's, I mean, the same thing. I found that a lot of like in Santa Cruz Mountains in California, all of the hills have a lot of bay laurel. And their red wines have this bay laurel quality to it. And this is super cool that, the winemaker has chosen to not over ripen, over oak the wine. You can actually still taste the place where it's from. Tell me more about this place.
So it is just so impeccably designed. And I think it's no accident that the flowers and the herbs and everything grown around it exemplifies the wines that they are actually making while they're there. The entire place is sustainable. They use wind energy and solar energy to do everything. And when you enter, this is the entrance into the tasting room. And to the left, you have this world famous restaurant. And to the right, you have all of the, you can see parts of the winemaking process where they have the old oak barrels that are stored on their sides and where they're aging these red wines. And then they have these really big cement barrels as well where they age the white. The Garzon Tannat is, of course, one of the most famous wines from this bodega, but so is the Albarino. You mentioned that and how the wines here can kind of be a little bit reminiscent of some of the Spanish ones we had a few months ago. And the Albarino here is top notch. The restaurant, though, is something that is incredibly special. We talked a little bit about the meat attack at Estancia Vic, but Francis Malman is the chef who inspires chefs all over the world, but this is one of his restaurants. And so he has 9. They're all over South America. And then there's one in Miami, and I think he might have another one in the United States, but he is famous for essentially being Francis Malman. And he is a Patagonian chef, and he kind of became famous for using an open flame to prepare meat. And he has this super unique technique that he's written books about, that he's taught other chefs. And in 2015, he was on Netflix's Chef Table, and you see him emerging with all of this smoke kind of surrounding him as he walks, as he comes into focus with his open flame and his grilled meat. And he is just this elusive and complex man who's known for being honest, both in the kitchen and in life. And his approach to cooking and living feels like an homage to a forgotten time and place. And while many of the most influential chefs around the world have engaged in an escalating competition to be cast as creative and forward-thinking leaders in gastronomy, Malman has kind of swerved in the opposite direction, forsaking the trappings of haute cuisine and focusing instead on this primal style of hospitality whose core comes down to smoke, fire, air, stone, salt, rain, meat, and wine. And he has 9 restaurants all over the world. So other than Miami and South America, he does have one in France. And he's not associated with being the visionary behind just one menu at a particular establishment. He's known for being Francis Malman, and he is just such a personality, and the way he teaches his techniques, he has this very rustic and authentic approach to preparing food that feels so in line with South American food and winemaking, kind of from start to finish. And you get this feeling when you visit the restaurants that to experience the essence of his cooking, you really have to visit him on his little island, which is down in Patagonia. And his influence is growing kind of in proportion to his desire to distance himself from the culinary upper crust and do his own thing. And there are many U.S. restaurants, both in Napa Valley and Washington, D.C., all over that chefs will cite him as their inspiration and their influence. And going to Bodega Garzon is a place where you can actually experience this food. The meat is so high quality, the produce is so high quality, and it's just made to complement the wines. Every single thing, every single dish they have there is meant to go with the different wines. And it's only tasting menus. You can do a 4-course, a 5-course, a 6-course, depending. Like I said, we were there for Thanksgiving, so we went all out and had all of the courses. But it is just such a special food experience. And I think to end a trip in Jose Ignacio and at Bodega Garzon is going to be the highlight of your experience, and you're just going to want to come back and stay longer and longer every time. And that's kind of how I feel about Uruguay. I just love it. I love the mentality. I love the approach to food, the approach to wine, the approach to life. I love how warm and happy everybody is. I love how safe it feels. I love how progressive the country is. And I think it's just a super, super special place. And Adele, do you have anything else you want to add that you read up on about Garzón, or does anybody have any questions about any of the wines, any of the destinations within Uruguay, or questions for Mariana as well?
Yeah, I think when I was doing a little bit of research just about Uruguay in general, it's like the safest of all of the South American countries to visit. Like their crime rates are super, super low. And also it's just like, there's a lot of expats that have gone down there and stuff like that too. And is also like not the poorest country either. Like they're
the second richest.
Second richest, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Which is pretty cool. Oh, I did want to mention on this one, like if you didn't want meat, another fun pairing idea that I just kind of came up with was, what about like mole, like a mole sauce, like with like a thing.
Oh yeah.
And this wine together would be like really, really nice. I know that Sochi just reopens downtown, and that sounds really good to me right now.
Yeah, that would be perfect with this wine. Well, does anybody want to jump in and unmute themselves and ask any questions before we wrap up today?
I have a quick question across the board for both wineries and hotels. Kristen, you highlighted, I think almost all the hotels you highlighted sounded like they had a pretty small number of rooms. Uruguay is not a super populous country, and it seems perfectly relaxed and chill. Is that universal? Like most hotels are smaller, the wineries are smaller, the restaurants are smaller?
Yes, I think that is something you see across the board. The Sofitel in Montevideo with 116 rooms is by no means a large hotel, but that is one of the largest hotels. And there are lots of expats here who have homes. There's a big like villa rental scene as well, but everything is super just, yeah, very relaxed and very intimate feeling. You have small properties where the service is absolutely impeccable, and whether it's at the restaurants, whether it's at the hotels, and that is kind of the way of life there. And I recommend, one of the reasons I like November and March is technically that you're starting to get into shoulder season in Uruguay, and so you do avoid the crowds and you really feel like you're having that intimate experience. But in many cases, reservations are a good idea to have, because the restaurants are not very large, and dining in South America is an event. It's not a 90-minute get in, get your food, get out. It's like a 3.5, 4-hour affair. As an American though, I found going to dinner at 8:30, which was when most of the restaurants opened for dinner, we were usually the first ones in and had no trouble. And then as we're leaving around 10 o'clock, that's when you start seeing the crowds coming in. So there is that later kind of approach. I'm seeing a few more questions. Is it reasonable to travel with an infant to Uruguay? I think it's definitely something you can do. There aren't necessarily tons of kid-friendly activities, but that being said, it's not necessarily a place where you have to tick off a bunch of things. It's a place where you really can go and relax. And so I think having a small child would be a lot easier to manage here than in other places in South America, where you guys could really experience the country, and you wouldn't feel like, oh, my kid needs to, go to this museum and see this particular thing. You can just kind of relax and move a little bit more with a little bit more ease. Another question, did you visit any museums, art scene? The art scene is super cool, and you'll see lots of art exhibits within the hotels. All of the Vic properties have amazing art. Then within Montevideo, you have an art scene, you've got museums that you can visit there. And then there is a super famous art installation in Punta del Este, where you have like the hand emerging out of the sand. And it's from a sculptor who has a similar piece in Chile. I can't remember his name, but there is kind of a modern art feel there. a lot of that you get in the hotels and in their collaboration with local artists. And when we were staying at Estancia Vic, we went and toured Bahia Vic, and the general manager was telling us about the different art in each of the rooms and why it was important, who did it, what was cool about it. So you can kind of have that that cultural modern art tour in the hotels as well. And yes, to reiterate, it is it's super safe. I think compared to other cities in South America I've been to, I felt like I could let my guard down in Italy, in Uruguay, and we could just relax on the beach. I wasn't worried about, you know, we could go down to the water and take pictures and have our stuff on the beach. People talked to each other. People were super warm. The English is actually, Adele's asking, how's the English? We didn't have any problems getting by in English. Everybody knows Spanish, everyone speaks Spanish, and that's what you're gonna hear around you, but they do have menus in English, and everyone knows it pretty well. And so, and because you do have a big American like population that visits there, specifically from New York and from LA. And so to be able to do business and to kind of extend the season beyond just the South American summer, they really do have to be able to communicate really well. And it is just very cosmopolitan and very international in Jose Ignacio in particular. And Caesar says, Uruguay's an amazing place. Absolutely put it on your list. Albarino is great there as well. Couldn't agree more. This is one of the places where if I'm ever a person who owns a second home, this is going to be where it is. I absolutely love Uruguay and this is where I want to grow old. This is like, I want my kids knowing this country. Just the whole approach to life is so beautiful.
For us going to Uruguay, staying in the fancy Hotel Sofitel for 5 days and flights from Houston.
Say that again. What was that, Mary?
Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize I was on my mute. My mom did a quick search and found that on Hotel Sofitel for 5 nights plus flights was only $1,500.
Yeah, it's a very affordable destination. Peak season is going to be the 2 weeks before Christmas through mid-February, but the rest of the year, it really is a place where you can go and you can have this 5+ star experience on like a 3+ star budget, and which is really, I mean, it's not a, you want to go all out when you're there because it is so affordable and it is so beautiful and everything is super top notch. Like, just to give you guys an idea, at Parador La Huella, we went there for lunch. We each ordered like a cocktail or two. We ordered a bottle of champagne. We ordered appetizers, probably 3, and then probably, I think, 2 entrees. And we stayed there for about 3 hours, and our bill was $120 with tip. Total, not per person, and we were just kind of going all out. And we were drinking champagne, we were drinking Uruguayan wine. It was just a very affordable destination. And as far as COVID goes, I see some questions about COVID going on in the chat box. Uruguay closed its borders after, I think, at the end of March, when everything was kind of starting to happen. And this was at the end of their high season. Borders are still closed. From what I understand, life didn't change there a whole lot because they have a really strong healthcare system and had very few cases, didn't have many get in there to begin with. Mariana says less than 300 cases. And I know Uruguay is one of the 14 strongest passports in the world right now. just because of how they've handled COVID-19. And as far as I know, no word on when it's opening up yet, but they have it. They've done a really good job just with their approach to everything. So it's a great country. Well, guys, let's wrap it up today. Thank you all for joining. A special thank you to this segment's executive producers, Julie Pitts and Hugh and Peggy Idstein, to our guest speaker, Mariana Planes from Carmelo Resort and Spa. And we cannot wait to see you guys next week as we make our way to Chile. You can follow us on Instagram at Talk Taste and Travel, at Talk Taste Travel. We're on YouTube at Talk Taste and Travel with new episodes on Fridays and old episodes on Mondays. And we can't wait to see you guys next week. And we'll visit Chile and then announce our next segment's destination. So thank you all and have a wonderful week. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you guys on Wednesday.
Thank you. And I also super promise that we won't have any issues with the wines, and hopefully we'll have the wines available next week when we announce the next series, so you guys can come and pick them up right away. That's my goal.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.